Welcome to Learning React with me. Today we are going to talk about another interesting hook that lets you cache a function definition to avoid unnecessary re-renders. That hook is called useCallback. Let's try to understand this with an example. I have created a drop-down component which accepts two props, options and onSelect method. Options are the list of values that the drop-down should display. OnSelect method would emit the selected value to the parent component in which drop-down component is imported. Let's create a component called filters. I want to display two filters and see the selected values just below it. I have dummy data for the drop-down options here. First filter is to select the brand and the second filter is to select the model. These are two independent drop-downs. It's not like changing brand drop-down will change the values of model drop-down. They are just static drop-downs without any side effects. Filter component is imported in the app component already. Let's add two drop-downs here. And pass the props options and onSelect. Copy paste this for the second drop-down and import drop-down component here. In the first drop-down, pass filter brand. In the second drop-down, pass filter model for the options. Now we need two methods to select a value from each of these drop-downs. Let me start creating those methods. I'll name it as onSelect brand, which would receive one parameter, which is nothing but the value selected from the brand dropdown. Similarly, I'll create another method called onSelect model. This is to select the model from models dropdown. Let's pass these two to the dropdown component. Now, what are we expecting these methods to do? So when I click on the value in brand dropdown, I want that value to be stored in some variable in the filters so that I can display them below. So let's create a state variable. I'll name it as brand and set brand to update the brand. And let's make use of useState hook. Initially, this brand is going to be an empty string. Do the same thing for model as well. Rename this to model, set model, and this is also going to be an empty string initially. Now, when I click on one of the values in brand, this method will be called. Inside this, will update the model state, set model with the value passed from the drop-down component. Here it would be set, this should be set brand. Set brand, and here it's set model. Let me just console log to see what is the selected value here. Similarly, in the selected brand, let's save this. Let me just put these two drop downs inside a single div, and I will add a class name called drop downs. Now we want to see the selected values on the screen. So let me add another div here, and I will add some heading saying applied filters, below which I'll add two paragraphs which will display the selected model, which is nothing but the model state. Similarly, it will display a brand. Okay, Now our filter component is ready. Let's see how this looks on the UI. Okay, we have two drop downs here. In the first one, I can select the brand. In the second one, I can select the model and I can see the filters here. Let me just reverse these two. Let's place brand above model. Okay, so I have the values that I selected from the drop down displayed below. I have added a console log in the drop down component to see the props that are passed to the drop down component. So let's go back, open the developer tools, go to console. I'll just refresh the screen. We have two console logs for these two drop downs when the component is initially rendered. I will select a value from this. I see the drop down components rendered again, and I'll select a model. I see the drop downs rendered again. If you observe, we haven't changed any data for the props. It is always the same prop. Filter model is going to be the same, always going to have only these three values, and on select brand is always going to be the same function. It's the same with model drop down as well. So the properties are always going to be the same, but why is this re-rendered again and again when the parent component changes? If you have seen my previous videos, we talked about pure components and React.memo higher order component. If you haven't watched them yet, please watch it. Link is in the description. Our drop-down component is a pure component. Why would I say that? It would always give me the same output whenever same properties and state are passed. If you observe in our example, I am always passing this filter brand and the onSelect brand method to this drop down, and it would always give me the drop down which would look like this. This is not going to change even if I render it 100 times. So my component, my drop down component is a pure component. We can make use of React memo to avoid unnecessary renders. So let me wrap drop down component with React memo. Now what I'm expecting is, since I added React memo to this drop down, this component would not be re-rendered again and again because we are always passing the same set of properties, and since there is no state change, it would always be the same component. Let's see how it behaves now. Let me refresh. This is acceptable because this is the first time these two components are rendered. Now let's clear the console. Now I'll select one value from brand dropdown and I still see the dropdowns being rendered again. If I select models, it is rendered again. So why is this happening? So here is the thing. When the filter component re-renders, these functions will be recreated. Every time it's going to be a new function. Hence the child component also re-renders as there is a change in the props. When the function doesn't change, why can't we cache it? This is where useCallback comes into picture. Let's try. So the syntax of useCallback is useCallback. This will take two parameters. The first one is the function that you want to cache, and the second one is the array of dependencies. Now let's wrap on select brand with use callback. Use callback. This is our function or the callback that we want to cache, and the array of dependencies. So what is my function depending on? So my dependency array is going to take the value, take the state brand. Let's do the same thing with the on select model as well. Use callback. First parameter is this callback or the function, and the second parameter is dependency array. In this case, it's going to be model. Let's save it and look at how the UI behaves now. Let's refresh. This is the valid console log because these two drop downs are initialized for the first time. Let me clear the console. Now I'll select option from the brand drop down. So brand is changed. So it was initially empty string. Now the value is set to B1. And that's the reason this drop down component is rendered again. And this is the drop down for brands. Now, if I select model, since the value is updated from empty string to M1, it is re-rendering only the models drop down. So if you look at this, this is the drop down for models. So when I select brand, it is not re-rendering models, and when I select model, it is not re-rendering brand drop down. This is because when the filters component is re-rendered for the first time, drop downs are loaded and these two functions are also cached. Next time, the cached function definitions will be passed instead of creating a new function every time. So the child components will not be re-rendered. But do we really need to change these, re-render these drop downs when these drop down values are changed? Because even if I select B1 or B2 or B3, this list is always going to be the same. Even in this case, even if I select M1, M2 or M3, this drop down list is going to have only three options. So in our example, we are not really dependent on the values that we select to render the drop down component, right? So let's just give an empty dependency array here and see what happens. Save it, go back. I'll just refresh. This is the initial render. Now I'm selecting B1. I don't see the drop down re-rendering. Now I'm selecting M2. I don't see the drop down re-rendering. This is how we can use callback hook. This is all about use callback in combination with React.memo. Hope this concept is clear. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Also, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to InterviewPro. Thank you.